Just introducing Donnie real quick. Donnie Dustin is a senior water resource engineer for the city of Fort Collins Utilities that has been there for almost 29 years, mostly with the Water Resource Division. He has served several roles in the division, but currently works on special projects for the division like Halligan Water Supply Project. As part of their water supplies, the city owns numerous shares in many different local ditch companies, and city staff members often hold board positions in these companies. Donnie has been on the board of Pleasant Valley and Lake Canal Company since 2018 and the North Poudre Irrigation Company since 2020, and previously sat on the boards of Larimer County Canal Number 2 and Warren Lake. He's also very familiar with many of the other local ditch companies in and around Fort Collins. So welcome, Donnie.
Good morning. Thank you. I guess I'll use this, but I can speak loudly. So why don't we just do that?
Okay.
And yeah, thanks for having me. Great burritos. Appreciate that. And yeah, I'll try to rifle through this quickly. You guys look like a savvy bunch. And although Jess said the title is Working with Your Local Ditch Company, she sent a list of questions that were more like, how do ditch companies work? So that's really what I'm going to present most of today. Just real quick, this is an aerial photo of our area, and hopefully you see some things here just based on color. When you look to the northeast, things are pretty brown. When you look to the west, things are pretty green. And the reason for that is, oh, sorry.
Oh, no,
yeah, I can do that. That's fine. Is, you know, on the Front Range here around Fort Collins in our area, we get about 15 inches of precip each year. And that's why I'll go back. You see all these green areas. It's all the irrigation that you guys use to help keep crops and other things green. And, you know, on the flip side, the mountains get about 50 inches per year. So that's really our storage of water is up in the mountains, comes out slowly. Another aerial image that, what pops out to you looking at this image? Anyone? Storage.
I have to just
storage is very important.
Really quickly because they're not seeing it online.
Oh, okay.
So one moment.
You don't have to do the notes view. I can just.
Okay, yeah. Great. Yeah, let me just get this out of the way and then present. Let's see.
So I have to ask, anybody
you guys see
problems finding how to get here today? Because I did.
You can't see it now.
The construction out there didn't help,
here. Let me. One moment. Stop share. Okay. And let me share.
I'll ask another question. How many irrigate off a ditch company? Okay. How many know who their ditch company is? Okay. So Jess gave me some questions that were more about that. Like, how do I get to know my ditch company? So I'll give you lots of information about that, but.
Great. Now is it working?
It's the wrong view.
Okay, again.
It's in presenter.
One moment. This always happens. Okay, so here we go.
Good
now
meeting without some technical.
Now can you see it?
It's not matching.
Okay, that's just one moment. I've done this. This has happened before.
Now it looks like it's matching.
Okay. We can stop share. Oh, you know what? This has happened before. Let me just go like this.
Are there any predictions on when the water levels are going to drop to where irrigation companies can't roll?
I'll get into that in the presentation, and it depends on your irrigation
We're number
company.
17 on yeah.
So are you the Taylor and Gill? No. I got you in my presentation, so. Yeah, I mean, I'll allude to this while we're waiting. Each ditch company has different rights. They may have storage, they may not. The way the system works is as the river drops, the priority or the seniority of what ditch company can take drops. And it's hard to predict. I will say that. So
just count fixes all.
Okay, so let me fly through this. So yeah, storage is important. This is a graph of the Poudre River average gauge flows at the mouth of the canyon. Like the historic average there is in blue. It's very peaky when it gets hot up there, it comes off. And part of the reason for storage and part of why there are so many irrigation companies, about 2/3 of that runoff happens in a 2-month period. You got to have some storage to be able to capture that, spread it out through the year. The other thing, and very important to the prior presentation planning, it's a variable supply of water from the Poudre River. This shows historic total volume of water coming out of the canyon each year, a native amount, and it varies from as little as 100,000 acre feet per year to as high as 700,000 acre feet per year, with an average of 300. I'm guessing this will be the lowest in recorded history if we don't get some rain. I'll allude to that at the end. So there are a lot of ditch companies off the Poudre Basin. This is just an old line diagram we have that shows, I think it's around 25 different diversions off the Poudre River from up in the canyon all the way down to Greeley. These lines show where they take off, and the thickness of the line is a slight representation of how much water they take. So thinner lines, not as much, thicker lines, more. Some of the big companies in our region are the North Poudre Irrigation Company that serves the Wellington area, Water Supply and Storage Company. Their canal's called Larimer County Canal. That's a common thing. Ditch companies have about 3 names for everything they own, so good luck on figuring out what's what. The other big company is the Larimer and Weld Irrigation Company, both WISC, WSSC, Water Supply Storage Company, and Larimer and Weld serve both Larimer and Weld counties, obviously. And then the New Cache La Poudre Irrigation Company. We call these the 4 big ones. They definitely take on the order of 40 to 60, 70, 80,000 acre feet of water per year in those ditches. So just focusing in on the Fort Collins area, you can see this is a list of over 20 different ditches or laterals or all those things. So it definitely is prevalent in our region. So a little bit about Colorado water law basics. Not knowing the crowd, maybe you're savvy and have heard some of this, but really water law came around back in the, I believe, 1850s, 1860s. I'm going to give a folksy version of what I've heard is that Greeley, or the Union Colony, as it was called back then, had built ditches. Later, Fort Collins came along. They built some ditches too. Dry year comes along. Folks in the Union Colony are like, what's going on? There's no water down here. They march up to Fort Collins and see that they're taking all this. And supposedly they were about to have a battle. People grabbed their guns, all that kind of stuff. And leaders of both colonies actually sat down in some church, I think, and figured out we need to figure this out. And it was really the beginnings of what's called the prior appropriation system that we use here in the state today. You may have heard of the quote, first in time, first in right. And essentially what that system is, if you were the first one to take water off the river, you get to go first, and then you start building that line. And so if there is a lack of water, you may hear seniors, those who got in line first, get to get their water in the full amount. And then it goes down that line to more juniors. And if you have a very, younger priority, you may not get a water in a year like this. So another key part to that is it requires beneficial use, crops, municipalities, those kind of things. Sometimes I get crowds like, what about the fish and recreation? Those are things that 150 years ago, people didn't care about as much. So they are a beneficial use now. They have very, very junior rights. Couple other property considerations. You cannot take water. If you own a big chunk of property and you got a river that goes through your property, you can't take water out of that. You have to go to the state, get a right to use that, and get in that line. Another one is you must allow ditch conveyance through your land. Most of these ditches are built, and they were built 150 years ago, and people wanted that, and it wasn't a problem. But today, and you don't get too many new ditches coming through. Just there's prescriptive easements, there's rights for those ditches to be there, there's protection under the state law to allow that. And then one of the questions I got from Jess is, if you own property and you take water, you have to have a storage right for that. You can't just capture it and store it. With the exception of rain barrels, about, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, the legislature passed, you can have on a residential only 2 55-gallon drums of rain barrels. Any more than that, you're stealing the state's water. But one thing is, if you do capture water, say, stormwater runoff, you have 72 hours to get rid of that. So if you're developing a stormwater pond, I just saw some big ones driving in here today, it has to put it back into the stream system within 72 hours. So the state kind of administers all of the water. This is meant for you not to read this. It's just to show this is what's called a line diagram of the Poudre River. It shows all the rights, all the priorities. I think the circles represent different companies or reservoirs and this, that, and the other. The green lines are the physical stream. So that's the Poudre. You can see the North Fork of the Poudre up there, some of those tributaries up further, the canyon, those kind of things. It's a very, very complex system. Lots of rights and whatnot that go in there. I mentioned commissioners at the top. The state, besides having a whole host of people in the Department of Water Resources that help track who can use what and so forth, most of the major rivers have a river commissioner. Your ditch company probably contacts them every day, if not multiple times a day in a year like this, to find out what they can take off the river and, the yields that they're getting. They're important people to know. We have a new Poudre River commissioner, David Bridge. He started last summer. So he's getting not baptism by fire, hopefully, but he's learning the hard way, but he's been around for years. So ditch company water rights. Each ditch company is different. Some of them may have one single right, like you mentioned. Some may have multiple. Part of that is the history of the ditch. A lot of times, as I understand it, you might have gotten a few farmers that built 1 mile ditch, and then some other farmers came, hey, can I, build onto that ditch? Each time they did that, they would file a new right. So you might have longer, more historic ditches that have multiple rights because they kept building onto it over time. The other thing is that reservoir, I think it took a while for them to realize they have to have storage in there. So typically reservoir storage rights are more junior than the actual direct flow rights. So some of the bigger companies, they have a big mix of them. So this is a document we had in our office that I just happened to find for this presentation. Just shows an example of a couple different companies. The one on top is Taylor and Gill. That runs actually out of LaPorte, is where the diversion off the river, and it really only serves a small area around LaPorte. Yeah, and kind of north Fort Collins. So it only has one single right, and that's priority number 17 on the river for 12.17 CFS, which is not a bad amount. I would suspect if things stay as they are, that might drop out in a month or two. It just depends on how things are going to roll out.
We've been 70 years.
Yeah.
My dad said back in the late 50s, it came in 1st of June and went out the end of June and never came in again.
Yeah, I mean, some of these, if you look at some of these priorities, I would be willing, I don't know what the priority is right now. And that's partly because not all the irrigation companies have come on. Once everybody wants to start taking water, that priority, what's called a call on the river. So if a ditch company with a more senior right is not getting their water, they call the commissioner and say, hey, I'm not getting my water. That's called a call. Commissioner has to figure out who do I need to drop out? What junior priority do I need to drop out so these senior priorities can get their water? We are going to be on call all year long unless we get the flood, which I'll get to. So Anyway, in contrast, Jackson Ditch Company, that's another one that takes out around the LaPorte area. They have multiple rights. And then you've got a company like Water Supply and Storage that has several direct flow rights and lots of storage. So it just depends on the ditch company that you are involved in and the kind of rights that they have. Ditch companies. There's kind of a wide variety of them. You may have a single owner that owns its own ditch and its own water right, one person. You can have several users on one ditch. There's no company. They just get together, they fix the ditch, they deal with the river commissioner. Pretty simple. Then you get up into, and I probably should have said, kind of a medium-sized company where, yeah, there's enough shareholders where you need to have ditch rider, maybe even a manager of some sort that helps you with business activities, collecting assessments, all that kind of stuff. And then you get into these larger mutual ditch and or reservoir companies, like those 4 big ones I was mentioning. So not to confuse it more, but sometimes those big companies have subsidiary companies, like just a reservoir company. Larimer and Weld Irrigation Company has a few of those subsidiaries where they might own one big reservoir that not only serves all Larimer and Weld shareholders, but might serve a small set of shareholders just under that one reservoir. So it can be complex. One other thing I want to mention are lateral companies. You may get your water out of a main ditch, but it comes through a lateral. And that lateral is big enough and serves enough people that they form their own company to maintain that lateral. And I was going to, I think, get that into that. Well, I'll get into it now. Laterals, essentially, when it comes to maintenance of the ditch companies maintain the main ditch. They'll maintain the head gate that puts it into your farm or into your lateral. But anything beyond that is up to you or your lateral company to take care of the ditch from there. So that's why in a lot of times, I think most times, the lateral companies don't own any water. They're just formed to help, maintain the ditch. Kind of like I have an HOA, and thank God it's not rule heavy. It's just to maintain roads because I live in Larimer County. So how do I find my ditch company? Again, seems like most of you know. You should know. They're probably trying to send you a bill, those kind of things. But if for some reason you didn't know, one thing I want to point out is Larimer County has a list of practically all. It's not comprehensive. They have a disclaimer at the top. Don't know how up to date it is, but it lists practically all irrigation companies in Larimer County. So that's a good resource, which I'll put the link down for. If you didn't know, hopefully somebody selling a property is going to tout that it comes with water. And, hopefully that's going to be part of your purchase price and so forth. So hopefully you find that out when you buy a property. You can always ask the prior owner or the real estate agent and so forth. Internet search, you can figure that out. What's the ditch next to me? Hey, let me Google that ditch company and find those things out. Ask a neighbor, call a friend, whatever. One thing I would say, if you do know, is to meet and know your ditch rider. There are a wealth of information for how your ditch works, priorities, those kind of things. So how does ditch system work? This is just a little schematic I put together. Poudre River, you're probably going to have a main head gate diversion off the river that puts water into your main ditch. Then off that ditch, as I described, there might be multiple users. You'll see small head gates like this. The one on the left there might send water through the main ditch and a couple laterals that go off. So we got 5 minutes. Other ones might be smaller than that. The lateral ditch, I already talked about that. All this to service fields. And then if you're lucky, you're part of a ditch company that gets water into a reservoir and can release that into the system. So that's in short how it works. So how do they allocate water per share? Highly dependent on the company, depends on their rights. I am giving you general information here, but it's best to contact your ditch company for that if you don't know already. If it's a company that has one or more water rights only, they're just delivering everything they can to all shareholders. If it gets limited, if those priorities drop out or something, they may toggle deliveries. They may say, okay, half the ditch, we're going to be on for 3 days, and then we'll switch to the other half. So that could happen too if you have multiple priorities and then some of those drop out and there's less water. The other one, if they have a mix of rights and storage, they're probably going to provide those direct rights first. And then once they drop out, they'll be providing storage. But in terms of how much water you get per share, my general expectation of these kind of companies, they don't allocate an amount. It's just you get what you get depending on your priorities. And usually an amount of water is kind of like the average over a long term, in Fort Collins, we own shares of Arthur Ditch Company, which yield about 3.5 acre feet per share. Some of the other companies, it's like 40 acre feet per share. It varies with every company. So on the bigger ditch companies, they do typically set an allocation. And it's because they have lots of different supplies to go from. Some of them, like the North Pooter Irrigation Company, we just did this a week and a half ago. We supplemented this past Friday. We set an amount. If you own a share, you're going to get X acre feet per share. And there might actually be components of that. In that case, that particular company has 40,000 units of CBT. So there's a kind of a CBT component and then more of a native component. Other companies, and I do not fully understand this, but I'm going to do my best. They'll dictate a day of supply. An example is the Larimer and Weld Company. They'll say, we've got 20 days of water this year. That does not mean that they're only going to run the ditch for 20 days. I think it means that if every shareholder took their full allotment based on the supplies they think they're going to have either in storage or get off the river, they can run for the full system for 20 days. That means you get to parse out, well, I don't want it all on this day. And, they'll be able to run through most of the year. So maintenance, generally speaking, the main ditch company is responsible for maintaining the main ditch. They probably don't want you messing in their ditch. If you see a problem, hopefully your ditch company, give them a call. Some of the smaller ditch companies, we have worked with the landowner and cooperatively done stuff together. So bigger ditch companies usually take care of anything. Otherwise, as I've mentioned, the laterals, you're on your own to maintain those. Typically a ditch company doesn't get involved, and make friends with your lateral neighbors because I hear horror stories about that. So, okay, one thing I want to add, hopefully you all know about the Colorado Big Thompson project. Basically, it's a big system that provides water from the west slope over there at Grand Lake, brings water over here. A lot of ditch companies either own or rent in CBT. Just a couple of weeks ago, Northern Water that administers that water set the quota at 80%. If you own a unit of CBT, they give 100% quota, you would get 1 acre foot per unit. 80%, everyone would get 0.8 acre feet per unit. It's a supplemental thing for the region. It's important because it brings a lot of water into this basin. And in a year like this, it's going to be pretty important. So, water rentals, the city of Fort Collins does it, Greeley does it, a lot of municipals generally. We get supplies that, last us through a lot of time. And in most average to wet years, there's an excess and we try to rent that out. There's probably not going to be a lot of that out there this year. So, but typically if you're familiar with that, you need to contact those cities. For us, we do some internally. We also give the water to the ditch companies to rent out too. So I will say it's not a reliable source. We've purchased those shares for bad years, and when it's a bad year, it's not going to be available. So, yep, bad year. This, you've already seen this. This is Poudre Basin as opposed to South Platte. We have had some reprieve. I think this one tells more of the story. So this is the Poudre River at the mouth of the canyon gauge. So that black line is what you normally see on average. If things don't improve, we saw the peak on March 27th, over 2 months before you normally see the peak. And if we're lucky, that kind of base flow you're seeing will stretch as far as you can through the year. But this is what's going to cut those priorities off pretty quickly. So, yeah, you know these things. Worst snowpack. Contact your ditch company for knowing. You, like you heard in the previous presentation, probably want to consider fallowing, different crops, less cuts of hay, those kind of things. So, and just a couple resources I'll leave up. Otherwise, I just want to say there's a glimmer of hope. Hopefully you've heard El Nino, La Nina. El Nino is coming back. In fact, they're talking about a super El Nino. El Nino is basically when it gets warm in the Pacific Ocean, and typically around here it means summer rains. So pray for rain, do your rain dance. It can make a big difference. I'm not going to predict it, but I would not be surprised if we see a flood this summer. Those kind of things. So yes, I had a question in the back.
I don't know much about tailwater rights and if that's a thing
Yes.
and how that works.
So I'm going to interpret tailwater as being, usually at the end of your farm fields or even at the end of the ditch, there might be water left. And that's going to make it back into the river or into another ditch system. And that's important. That's part of why there's engineers like me, because when you change it, when a municipal buys a share, changes it through water court, you have to maintain that system of making sure that those return flows, or what we call them, there are return flow obligations. Everybody's depending on that tailwater or return flow. So when you change it from agricultural, it used to be put on a field. Now we're going to take it up and put it in a treatment system. We still have to make sure that those return flows are in the same amount, location, quantity, all that kind of stuff. So it is important. Yes, sir.
We have a North Poudre irrigation ditch that goes through our property. Have they considered piping those to avoid evaporation? Or
yes.
Do you have a feeling of how much you lose with evaporation?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on different locations. Sure. North Poudre has done a lot in the last 10 years of piping different sections where they had very high loss. It gets expensive. But yeah, they do their best to try to minimize that as much as possible. North Poudre is a pretty big system and can handle those kind of things. It's a little tougher for smaller companies that,
I can talk to about piping in my.
Sure. Tad Mellon is the general manager over there. He can get you in the right spot. And Google North Poudre Irrigation Company. They have their own website. Their phone number is listed on there.
Yeah,
so
I use them.
I think I had one back here first.
In the same way that you just talked about an improvement with the piping, with the conveyance, the ditches and so forth. What are the one or two main things that ditch companies are doing with the storage to improve efficiency? Like raising dams, dredging, that kind of thing. Are they doing anything?
I gotta think about this. Well, North Poudre Irrigation, as an example, just enlarged Park Creek Reservoir, which is way up north and west of Wellington, to help add storage to the system. Dredging, very, very expensive to do. If it's more about them needing to get to the bottom of their outlet, they might do it, but it's generally a tough thing to do expense-wise. Otherwise, I think it's more about operating the system and maximizing what water can make it to their shareholders more than
the most ditching is what working on.
Yeah. So, another question in the back.
Wondering if you would have a recommendation. I have a head gate that's very low in the ditch, so it has a tendency of silting up relatively quickly within a couple hours. I'm always having to go out there and flush that out. I had always assumed that the head gate was part of the ditch's responsibility. Much like electric company, they've got it all the way up to the meter there.
Right.
But they kind of just told me to pack sand when it comes to that and just keep doing the same.
Yeah, I can't speak for all of them. I would agree that usually my understanding is it's the ditch company's responsibility for including the head gate. Some of these companies have hundreds of head gates and
Yeah.
They might need you to just go out there and clear it out every once in a while.
They know it's been a problem for a long time. And I've tried to, kind of give them where I'm at on my weir throughout the day. Do you think I would have any more or would I get any further if I put in like a Sutron monitor to that to provide them with accurate data as to how much we're losing throughout the day?
My main recommendation is just to talk to them. And you'll get more. How does it go? You get more with money than
I'm trying.
I don't know what more to tell you. Is the other one I've learned before, don't bring me a dead cat without a shovel. Go to them with a potential solution and say you're willing to help with that and see if they can that kind of thing.
They were helpful at least in giving me a key to it so that I could go out there, open it up, and flush it out, but I can't be necessarily out there every 2 hours doing.
Understood. Yeah. That's a tough situation. I wish I had more for you. And one last question. Yeah.
As tailwater, we have the Laporte lateral running across our place, but they don't recognize it. They won't maintain it. Me and my neighbor have to take care of that tailwater ditch because Laporte lateral doesn't consider it part of theirs.
Mhm.
I own Laporte lateral and Taylor and Gill shares.
Mhm.
Can I put water out of that tailwater?
I don't know the specifics of that one, so I'm not gonna get myself in trouble by coming up with what I think might be the answer, so.
One more actually online.
Oh, yeah.
Dave from Judy are asking, in a year like this, would water going to HOA green belts or golf courses be considered beneficial use? Shouldn't agricultural use be prioritized?
Yeah, that's
Should
it.
be juniors, right?
That's a typical question we get. I'll wear my city hat here, that yes, that is a concern. And I will say most municipals, including Fort Collins, the 80% CBT quota gives most municipalities, they own lots of it. They don't really need to be on restrictions, but almost every municipal I've talked to in Larimer County is going to be on some voluntary level. The CBT system, the way it's supposed to work, should have been 100% quota this year. I mean, it is super dry, but even they recognize if you don't, dole this out carefully, you could drain that system in a couple of years. For those who were around in the early 2000s, that's what they did. And it was early 2003, there was a 30% quota was their initial quota. If you were around, we got a big blizzard. They upped it to 50, but that was, so things are more careful. Yes, I get that. That's where we try to develop a system where we're renting that water out, the excess that we have. HOAs, if you're a treated water system and you're not on restrictions, doesn't really matter. If you're on a ditch system, you got to live by what the ditch is going to provide you that year. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Donnie.